I went through time when I started healing relationships. And I go, wait a minute, I still need to heal a relationship with Cheryl and Robin and Daniel. So it was the humility, becoming humble enough to get out of my head into my heart. And then my spirit be my guide and say, okay, and pray that forgiveness is a wonderful blessing we've been given, and it frees the heart.
Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, presented by Minky Couture, a weekly podcast where people share real-life experiences and the tools they develop to move forward and live their best lives. I'm Michelle Scharf.
And I'm producer Kellyanne, just to jump in real quick to talk about Minky and why I love it so much. I love Minky Couture. When we were trying to find a sponsor, the first thing I said was, let's ask Minky, because I wear my robe in here a lot in the studio because it's cold and it's just warm and cozy and wonderful. I have a Minky go bag in my car for when I go to movies, so it's my movie Minky.
Oh, I love
and
it.
My dog and I fight over our Minky like every night. Like, we love Minky. And then once I actually got to know the story behind Minky, it just made it even more amazing how, and I can't wait till we actually get the owners on the podcast as well. So if you need the best, softest, wonderfulest, just and also beautiful blanket, go to minkycouture.com, or there are 6 different locations here in Utah. And I'm going to hand the mic back over to Michelle.
Thank you, Kellyanne. We're going to excuse my co-host, Jennie Taylor. She had another conflict in her schedule. But today, I have a special guest with me on the show. Lloyd Davis is here with us today to share his story and a little bit about his new book on grief. And Lloyd and I actually met years and years and years ago in 1995 in a self-awareness training company in Salt Lake. And we have come and gone in and out of each other's life in different ways. We've kind of reconnected again in 2012 through politics. And now I've got this podcast and you've got a book on grief. So welcome to my show.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I sure appreciate you inviting me to come here and talk about my book and also about my journey.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming in. I had no idea the journey that you have walked personally in your life. We have known each other and we've been aware of each other, but I didn't know your personal story. And you sent me the book. Thank you for that. It's not a very long book. It was a quick read, and it was actually quite profound. The threads that you weave in your book of healing, I think they're universal truths in the process of grieving. It's a quick read. It's an easy read, although it could be traumatic for some people because the losses that you share. Why don't you tell us your story?
Okay, Michelle, thank you. The idea of my book came first to me when my first wife passed away in 1995, Cheryl. And after she passed away, I was new. I mean, I was only 33 years old. I was a young widower now and self-employed.
Young kids.
Three young boys. Yeah, my youngest was 18 months.
Oh.
So I was new to this. I had a business I was running. So I really just relied on my family so much. My family was so instrumental in my healing and my faith. But I decided shortly after my wife passed away, I wanted to write the book about what I'm going through, what I'm dealing with. Because, again, being a young widower at a young age and having 3 young boys, I was scared to death. I was petrified, actually. Mm-hmm. And the book started. That's how my book started. Then what happens, I went through my life and met my second wife, Robin, and shortly after, in 1997. But then my journey to grief continued again with my son. My middle son, Daniel, passed away. And again, like I write in my book, my grief found its way to my heart again and my life again. So I have what I learned from Cheryl's death, and I built on that. And with Daniel's, all new experiences, all new everything, but it just continued on my adding more experiences and more learning to me and my journey to healing.
Yeah.
And then a month less than 2 years later, my wife Robin passed away in 2019. And so it just, again, grief found its way into my life again, and life of my children too. I mean, not just me, my children.
Right.
My boys lost their mother, then my daughter lost her mother, and my boys lost their stepmother. So this whole thing just added chapters and aspects of grief and healing to myself, my life. And so I kept I call it grief journal. I wrote down in the grief journal how I felt, what I was feeling, and everything. Then with Cheryl and then with Daniel, I had another grief journal. Again, added more to it. But I also started posting on Facebook and on social media, and things I was feeling, and that became part of this book. And then when Robin passed away 2 years later, I posted a lot as well on social media about Robin, and then again Daniel, usually on anniversaries or birthdays, stuff like that. And so I always, when Robin passed away, I shared every day for the first 2 weeks because the pain was so acute. As I'm sure you understand, Michelle, I know you understand that.
Yeah, I do.
And so all these, my grief journal and my postings all became a part of this book, and that's part of how I healed. Sharing with others. When Cheryl passed away, I kept it close to the vest, my feelings. But
it sounds to me too, and a little bit in the book, that you were 33, you were a father of these young boys, you were overwhelmed by the additional responsibility, everything that was now compounded and on your shoulders. But it sounded to me a little bit that you were kind of gutting it out. Like you were trying to figure out how to move on. You didn't really have time to like grieve in a way to really heal and figure out how to move forward. Am I right in kind of picking up on that a little bit?
That's correct. I mean, that's totally right, Michelle. Because I did things when Cheryl passed away. I took what I call a spiritual quest. I had the blessing and knowledge that we would be together again, but like I wrote in my book, it was not enough. I wanted to know more, so I would venture many different aspects and teachings and traditions of afterlife or death of other cultures, Native American, Celtic, and to name a couple. And I was lost. I had no idea. I mean, no one ever close to me ever passed away before. So I was just lost. And so you're right. I just went through seat of my pants, really. And I dated a lot of women, and that was part of it. And so I didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you were honest and vulnerable about that. You said you dated a lot, and that was kind of your balm. You were kind of looking for like the antidote in a new person. And you know, I've been dating, and I've dated both widowers and divorced men. And it's interesting to me because I feel like widowed men tend to like jump in and they just want to replace that body. They're looking for like a body double. And I'm like, no, I'm not looking to replace my husband. And I jumped into dating pretty soon as well. But I also had the blessing of John, and we also had I would guess maybe I would say gift of time, where he was telling me, I want you to remarry. I don't want you to wait. I want you to find someone quickly. You know, so there was kind of pre-planning in that. And then when I started dating, I remember the first time somebody kissed me, and he just gave me a peck on the cheek after a movie, and it felt so wrong. And I couldn't even articulate to you really how wrong it felt, but it just like on every level. He was a very nice man. It was very tender. It was very sweet. It was very innocent. But I just remember realizing on my drive home, I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm doing the wrong thing by dating because I'm not ready.
Exactly. And that's nail on the head there, because when Cheryl passed away, 95, I was looking for someone to go to a movie with, or to go out with, or to be physical with. I mean, I was totally. I mean, in my book, I'm totally upfront about that.
Yeah, you were.
And I
appreciated the honesty. I have to say, I read that. I'm like, wow, that's really vulnerable. But I really appreciated, reading that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. And men are. I've noticed in my years of I talked to widowers and talked to widows, and men really do seem to need to have that need for physical contact right after, soon after. And it is true. I went there and I dated a lot, and I was looking for, at first, not to replace Cheryl, but I was looking for someone to fill the void that was there.
Right.
And that's what it was. And I realized, after well,
That's a better way of saying it.
yeah.
But it feels kind of like to me, to the men that I've experienced, and I've only dated a few widowers, that it's just like, and I'm sure they're not looking to, I think that you articulate that better than I did. It's not like really just looking to replace their wife so much, but it is having that physical contact, that other person. They're just missing the other. But it feels like I could be anyone. You're not really paying attention. I want to be seen.
Exactly. And I went through that. Exactly. 100%. And when Michelle first died, I was doing that. I didn't care. Really, I didn't want the feelings. I just wanted to fill the void. And there was a big, huge, when you lose someone, there's enormous emptiness in your life. Mm-hmm. I was looking to fill that. And I was looking for it in the wrong way because I was just looking for a warm body to go out with or be physical, whatever. I mean, like I wrote in my book, and it was empty, and it was not fair to them. Mm-hmm. But I was really just looking for physical contact and someone I could go out with and hold a hand and hand on my arm and that. But it was empty. I went out there once or twice, and that was it. And it was empty until finally, after a couple years of this, I decided this is not working. So I went back into that training, and I worked on myself some more. Mm-hmm. And I decided, and I was prayerful. That was the missing part right there. When Cheryl first passed away, I didn't reach out to my Heavenly Father at all. I apologized, but it was more carnal. Mm-hmm. Right. But when I finally decided, I got my kids to think of, I got myself and my future to think of, so I was prayerful about it, and I met Robin a couple weeks later. And
wow, that's a quick turnaround.
It was. I mean, it was. I remember I was in St. George, and I was just sick and tired of dating because it was just. I finally got the aha moment that we talked about in that training, and I said, "Heavenly Father," I was in Temple Square and St. George Temple. I'll put it in your hands, and I prayed down. Actually, got to my knees, and I kind of laid on my side and said, Heavenly Father, looked in the sky, it's in your hands. I can't do this anymore. And I met Robin 2 weeks later.
Wow.
At a singles dance. I never went to a singles dance ever. I met her at a singles dance, the first one I ever gone to my entire life. So
wow.
It was incredible. But yeah, I feel the whole thing with the first is empty. It was just empty.
Yeah, and part of that emptiness comes from the fact that when you lose someone, you are somewhat empty. You are still the person you are, but you now have this new experience, and you're no longer the person you were at the same time.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah. So much sense. What was empty about it was just the void of just having someone I care about.
Yeah.
That was not there until I met Robin.
Yeah. So you lose Cheryl, and you go into detail in the book about it. She suffered from a great amount of mental illness, and she really struggled with some severe depression and bipolar issues. Mm-hmm. And then she passed away from really her own doing. Yes,
it was her own doing. And Cheryl suffered a lot. And like I put in the book, is when Cheryl passed away, then her torment was over.
Yeah.
Because she was very emotional, imbalance, as you mentioned. And also she we found out mostly we knew some before that she had a brain tumor, but I didn't know how severe it was until the autopsy. And so that was where migraines came from. And so Cheryl really had
she had a lot going against her.
She did a lot going, yeah, exactly right. Emotionally and physically and mentally. And yeah, she finally just
You do mention in the book that you guys were actually divorced at this time when she finally did.
Yeah.
And that you struggled with kind of wondering where you had let her down. So it was clear that you may have been divorced, but you still had a great deal of love for this woman, and it's not necessarily what you wanted, but you both had decided that this was for the best.
Exactly. It came to the point where Cheryl was to the point where she was causing pain to me and the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And one day she sat there and we talked about this, and she decided, I just can't stand what I'm doing to you and the boys. So we decided she wanted to do divorce and separate. And I reluctantly, after a few months of talking and about this, we did.
Yeah.
But the week before she died, we talked about reconciling. We talked about reconciling a relationship and all that. And I did keep my love for her intensely.
Mm-hmm.
And I know she did for me, but she just, I guess the divorce was more of a byproduct of her mental state and emotional state.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it, I felt like in my book I let her down. I do. I mean, I did. At first, was I there enough for her? Was I do enough to assist her? Could I have done more? It was there, and I let her down.
Yeah.
Because in a divorce, it was rushed through, and I kind of, to be totally frank here, my attorney had me do a number on her, and I ended up with no alimony, and so really, I just felt so bad about that. And I was so young, but so since then I've just gone back and said, we did the best we could. But then, since she's passed away, it's in my book too. In the chapter 11, I had an experience with Robin, Cheryl. I apologize, and she came to me at night, and we communicated together, and we reconciled, and we are reconciled now. And she is my first wife, and we are, in the married.
Right, you're LDS.
LDS.
You're a Latter-day Saint.
Yes.
And so she's your first sealed wife.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And so that stays.
It stays, yeah. I have people even suggest to me, you might want to cancel that. I go, no way.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Cheryl have been reconciling, but I would no way do that. I could not cancel my marriage to Cheryl in the temple, sealing the temple, more than I could fly the moon. I could no way do that.
Yeah.
And since then, we've had continual relationship experiences and communications, and she feels the same way. If she even said that in my communication in my book, I told her she did. She loved me and loved the boys, and she was out of pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you include that in the book, and I love that you talk about continued relationships after death. I'm no longer active in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I have had multiple experiences with John, and I just, regardless of what is true for us after this life experience and whoever's listening, faith may be, the one thing that I know for sure is that we don't cease to exist, and our loved ones can communicate with us, and they will. So it's an incredible blessing. I know my husband came to me when I was dating somebody and said it's time to leave this person. And I was very confused by it because that was not my intention, and that was not where my mind was going towards at all. And it ended up saving me from a situation that I didn't really realize it wasn't what I was thinking it was. And it wasn't until that relationship ended that I started to understand that better.
Wow, what a blessing that was for you.
Yeah, yeah. So it's so interesting, right? That's what I really loved about reading your book. It's like there's some truths and there's some things that I've also experienced that are just, and I've spoken with a lot of other people that have lost their loved ones. And I definitely believe and know that we don't just cease to exist.
That's one of the foundations of my whole journey of healing and peace. Mm-hmm. My whole motivation was of just being healed and finding the peace and healing and the communication with them is that we will see them again. I just so look forward to that day.
Yeah, that's
my primary motivation I just continue my journey and just learning, and because I know I will see them again and the joyous reunion that will be.
Yeah,
and that's a huge motivation for me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. In a world where we live in, where we're all about disconnecting or ending relationships, or everyone's toxic, or that person creates drama or trauma or this or that or whatever, there's this underlying current and an appreciation that you've learned in your life experience that life is really about the relationships. It's truly the only thing we take with us.
Yes, exactly. Because they're eternal.
Yeah.
And I totally feel that they are with us, and they do communicate to us, as you and John.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful blessing of having that knowledge that just gives us a meaning. Because I can't imagine having no knowledge of the afterlife and that would be seeing me. I can't imagine the dead end, so to speak. I can't imagine how empty that must feel. But to have that knowledge is just such a blessing to us in our life.
Yeah, and it's one thing to have the knowledge, but it's another thing to actually have a lived experience, right? Where you actually feel like you've had a conversation with Cheryl since her passing, and you've reconciled the differences, and you've asked for forgiveness or received forgiveness, and there's healing that comes from that, and it's so powerful.
Exactly. And again, in my book, I write about that forgiveness. Me and Cheryl forgave each other, but the true pathway to find healing is forgiveness and love. To me, without forgiveness, there's no healing.
Yeah.
And so that's part of my book too. Is just, wow, I'm glad you brought that up. But forgiveness is incredible. I mean, to free your heart, to be able to just embrace your loved one that's passed away, and that is all a part of my healing journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. So tell us a little bit about Daniel.
Well, Daniel, my father always said, Daniel had no guile, and he had a pure heart. But Daniel was going to school. He had some issues with his seizures. He had seizures as 14 years old. He was diagnosed with seizures, and he has a medication that he was given. And then on his mission for the LDS Church, he had seizures there, so they gave him additional medication. So he had two medications in his had to take, and they're so intense that he had to take them only under strict doctor supervision. And so Daniel, at times, would just self-medicate and go off on his own, do it his own way, and he did it twice for over a lengthy period of time, for a couple weeks at least. He tried to end his life both times. And so...
Yeah, those drugs have real impacts, and that's one of the warning labels on them, that you can't just quit taking this medication. That is a big no-no. It's supposed to titrate off and under a doctor's supervision, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I went to doctor's appointments with him, and Daniel, because one of them gave him migraines or intense headaches. So he would take that one. That was the most intense one. So if we take that one off, or I guess decreases what he was taking, then it's an imbalance. And his mind was so imbalanced. And actually, the coroner's report showed that he had excessive dose levels of one, but nothing in the other. So it was complete imbalance, and his mind was not firing off correctly. The neutrons in his brain was not firing off correctly. So he was just, right the day he died. Before he went downstairs, he said, "Dad, I got to go to lay down for a while. My brain is not functioning right." One of his last words to me was that. So because I found out later that, his medications were over the map. They were just totally imbalanced. That the doctor said he had no idea what he was doing.
And he was a young man, but I would like to point out he was a young adult.
Yes, he was.
So it's not like you could really manage those medications for him. He was responsible for this.
Exactly. He was 28 years old when he passed away. I mean, Robin left him to manage him because he was an adult, and so we trusted him, and he did great. But sometimes he would just change a little bit. But this time he changed, took one totally off, didn't take one completely, and so he went downstairs and his brain wasn't working. He called me, and it was the weirdest thing. I could not understand him. It wasn't Daniel talking to me. He was gibbering and mumbling some was even English to me. And then he hung up, and then about a couple minutes later, I heard a shot, the bang in my basement, and I went down and found his body. So Daniel, and the coroner said he was just not accountable because his brain was not even working. And he told me that before he went down, my brain's not working right. So Daniel ended his life on his own, and it was an emotional time for me. I mean, excuse me, I found Cheryl's body, but I found Daniel's, and that hit me so hard. I laid there, I sat there in the basement, cradled his head in my, bleeding head in my lap, and I just zoned out. But my beautiful son laying there, and he struggled a lot with depression through his life. But he finally was getting at his school, about to graduate from school and getting things going forward and everything. He loved his job, but then he just did to himself by self-medicating. And I found out I had to forgive Daniel for doing that because I was mad at him at first. But another friend of mine said, a good friend of mine who knows our family well, said Daniel was just too good for this world because he had a huge golden heart and people take advantage of him because of that. But Daniel, I've also had communication with Daniel since he passed away, and he's just a wonderful young man. And
he was a beautiful young man. I've seen pictures. I've seen your post online. We've been friends online for a long time.
Yeah.
I watched that whole thing transpire. It was shocking, just shocking. I remember seeing his picture and seeing your post and just thinking, oh man, he's so beautiful and too young. It's just tragedy.
Way too young. And there's a quote, it's in my book as well too, but it keeps coming back to my head. It's out of the Lord of the Rings movie, Two Towers, that no parent should have to bury a child.
Yeah.
And that is, we both lost a spouse, and a child is right there as far as pain goes. And because you always say they'll outlive you. Your kid's supposed to outlive you. So losing a child is
it's always been one of my deepest fears.
Yeah.
Especially being a mom. I had 8 miscarriages before my first child was born, and then 2, and one of those was very late, 26 weeks. And that is a grief of its own, and it's hard, and I don't want to dismiss that in any way. It is not comparable to 32 years of a relationship and losing a spouse. But my greatest fear is that I will have to one day bury a child. My mother-in-law, John's mom, buried 2 of her sons. She's still living. And, I can't imagine that. And it's a whole different grief. And you quoted that in the book as well. And I agree. It's just not the nature of things, right? Our children should bury us. That is the correct nature that we would want to have happen. Of course, it doesn't always work out that way.
You're right, Michelle, because I found out firsthand it's a totally different kind of different grief. It's a different experiences are different, but it's a completely different way of grieving. And unfortunately, I experienced both of them, but also it's beautiful because there are some things that me and Daniel shared that me and Robin didn't share and Cheryl didn't share. I remember me and my boys going to concerts together for the first. It was so cool to be able to go to a Rush concert with my boys, and we used to play games together on video games together. But when you lose that son who you raised and who you seen born and you brought up and you taught, getting right and wrong and everything, all the experiences, it's different, and it's a different emptiness, but it's not there. I have 3 other children, but still not having Daniel there is, you grieve differently for your son, for your children.
Yeah.
It's acute and it's very, very, very painful, but it is different than a spouse.
Yeah. My
living son, Samuel, has really a hard time with his brother dying than anybody else. His mom, his mom died, he was 18 months old, but he had having a hard time with his son. His brother's death. It's tough.
Yeah. And that's another added complication to your entire story, is this is your story and this is your book, but then there's complicated grief around you, the impact that those had on those young boys, the impact of another mom in their life, and then she passes away too. So let's talk about Robin. 2 years after Daniel took his life.
Robin,
you'd been married to Robin now for how long?
20 years.
20 years.
And 21 years when she passed away. But Robin was not a big surprise to us because she had major health issues.
Yeah.
She had diabetes since she was 8 years old, and she had kidney failure. And the year before she died, she was in the hospital 6-7 months of the year, or hospital or a rehab place, because she had multiple blood infections and issues with her diabetes. And so Robin had failing health. She did, and she was on dialysis for 3 years before she died. So that was that's what caused her to pass away. Robin was my dad was gonna take her to dialysis that day. It was the day I was working, and he just went to pick her up every Tuesday, and Robin didn't respond to a knock on the door. So my dad went upstairs and found Robin in her bathroom. She was just laying on the floor in a pool of blood. And I was working. I felt something was wrong, so I hurried home. I got there just after the paramedics got there, and it was like I'm sitting there watching my wife, who's barely got a pulse, right? Just on the floor there in her bathroom. And
Did she fall, or you go to detail in the book, but for our listeners, they're going to be thinking.
We think what happened, she was getting ready, and she was sitting in a toilet, getting ready, and but we think she actually collapsed because she had her oxygen off. When her oxygen's off, she kind of get a little lightheaded, and then she was just sat down, I think, to fix her catheter, or maybe come on. We're not sure if it came unclipped or if it was defaulty. We're not sure yet. Somehow it got dislodged, and she didn't have the wherewithal because of her oxygen being off so a while to fix it. So she just collapsed basically and just bled out there. And I think she just the paramedic said she fell asleep and collapsed to the floor. She didn't really fall hard, I don't think, because there's no evidence of that. But I just think she just slid to the floor and just laid down, and it just kept bleeding out, and she could not have the mental presence to fix that.
What was this catheter for?
Dialysis. It was basically a femoral artery in her leg.
Okay.
And so since it's in her artery, it's going to bleed out
rapidly.
Yeah, rapidly. And so they're not sure what caused it. Was uncapped when we got there. But so it's just dislodged, and she just did not have the mental, I guess, capability or awareness to clip it back on or fix it, to stop it. She just collapsed, and then she bled out.
Oh, it's so sad. It's so sad. I am so sorry. It's so much loss in your life and so much grief.
Yeah, that's one thing that we never plan on, as you know.
Yeah.
And it's the worst fraternity there is in the world.
Yeah. Right? Nobody wants to join this club.
No. But all you can do is just move forward.
And all of us that are members are like, we welcome you, and we're sorry that you're here, right? It's the strangest group of people to be in a club with.
It is. It is. But
because we get it, right?
Yeah,
we're like, welcome to the club.
We've been there. We know what it's like to
It
lose those
sucks.
smells.
And, and the great thing is that when you do find like widower support groups, there are some typical things like that year of the grief fog. There's like some typical things that pretty much, if you're going to go through this, you'll have. What makes it different is our personal understanding, our awareness level, our willing to heal, are willing to call it as it is, to be able to see the gifts in it, to create our own purpose or understanding of why this happened and why this is our experience, and then to create purpose out of that, right?
Exactly.
And that is very different between everyone. It's a very individual journey when it comes to that.
Completely.
But there are some themes or some things that happen along the way that are you can count on. A year of a grief fog. Not having your brain work as well, not being able to recall words sometimes. I was extremely articulate. People hired me in politics because I was articulate. And I remember going back to work, and my boss came with me to one of the first committee meetings I had to go testify in. And I got off the stand, and he said, "What was that?" And I said, "I don't know. I just..." you only have a certain amount of time to address legislators in a committee meeting, and it's timed, and you get your time and you're done. And I just drew a 45-second blank, which took up a great deal of the time, So I didn't really get to promote and say all the things and make all the points that needed to be made. And I felt really bad about it, but there's really nothing you can do about it. Sometimes you kind of have an idea, I'm not all on it today. And other times it just comes at you suddenly.
Exactly. Yeah, it does, Michelle. And when you lose someone close to you, it hits you hard. You go the first week after you got to plan the funeral, you got to plan everything. You got to choose a headstone, choose a casket, and all that stuff. That is just a blur. It really is a blur.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I can't remember half the stuff I did the first week. But then as time goes on, there are days when you just, I'm doing great. I mean, you lose someone, you have experiences over many, many years. You are a part of them. They're a part of you. And when that is gone, the identity is physically gone from you. And so you have this, everybody has pain. Everybody wants to get better. Everybody wants to get past and move forward, all this stuff. But your reality and my faith,
Mm-hmm.
my belief system, my relationship with my deceased loved ones, all determined how I would move forward, how I would find healing, how I would handle this. But there are days when it's good and you move on, but there's days when you just all of a sudden hit you. Like I said in my book, there's music, a song you hear, or something you see or experience, or something that and it hits you, and you either you freeze. You think about it, and then your mind, it's almost like your mind is giving you some protection in a way, because it goes into kind of a fog.
Yeah.
I call it a fog, because you never stop missing them. The reality of who they are to you is always there.
Mm-hmm.
And that creeps into you when you don't expect it. And
Yeah.
I've had a couple of times when I was just sitting there too, and all of a sudden wow, I'll be driving along, and it's like, how did I get here?
Right.
It's because I'm thinking of my loved ones, or just because it's hard to describe somebody who hasn't been through this. You have,
Yeah.
but you just almost go into autopilot sometimes, because otherwise it'd be very, very painful, and pain's acute. But I have a hard time with words here, because
It is hard to describe. I read a book called A Grieving Brain, and it talks about the science behind our grief and the chemical process of our brain and the damage that it does. Grief is actually damaging to our brains. Not a great sign for me. I have a mother with dementia, and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm just batting. On the grief scale, I've had so much grief, and I just think, I don't know. This is not boding well for my future. But I think in part, my understanding from that book is, I think a little bit of that grief fog, from what I gathered from reading in this book, is our brains work on memory and on repetition. And so we get up in the morning, we have the same person in our bed, there's these things that we can count on. And then when somebody suddenly is taken out of the picture, the brain is lost, because the brain is used to specific memories and cues, which are no longer there.
and input.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so our brain is trying to make sense of the thing that is gone, but our brain doesn't really have the understanding to, we have to process for our brain that this person is no longer here on this earth with us, and we're no longer all the things that the brain had been dreaming and fantasizing in a future, and all the things that were built around this person are not there any longer. And I think that that's part of the fog. I think part of the fog is the brain goes, well, I don't know what to do here. I don't know where to go with this. I don't know how to process. I don't have the same picture that I would have built, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this person's no longer there.
Exactly. That happens to me sometimes when Robin first passed away, doing just normal functioning daily household duties, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Robin said she always handled. I'm thinking,
Why isn't that done?
Exactly. So and my brain freezes up saying, okay, now I have to do this. That's figures. Okay, now what would Robin do? I mean, it is. And your brain is the input, and the person who assists you with all these activities or anything you dealt with, your brain is just looking for that input. And if it's not there anymore because they've passed away,
it just doesn't have anywhere to go.
It doesn't. And there's no reference anymore.
Right.
And so when you lose a loved one, it's just, wow, I one thing I did not do when Cheryl passed away is my emotions. I just kind of didn't really acknowledge them. But I did later. And then when Daniel and Robin passed away, I realized that you need to do to process grief, and emotions are one of them. I just said, okay, fine, I'll acknowledge them and let them go. Just let them go forward, let them go and just happen. And boy, that did help me with the fog. It helped me with everything because I write my book, Emotions Are Telling You Something. And they were telling me where I was in my grief. If I was not acknowledging this, actually, I had some emotions I was not acknowledging, forgiveness or guilt. So, and so, boy, it's just a roadmap for me.
Yeah.
And
I could do a whole show with you just on the piece of forgiveness.
Yeah.
I have gleaned a lot of grieving exercises to do. Things like, taking the ABCs and writing them out and then writing the positive attributes of that person. You can also do that, writing the negative attributes of that person, just having a balanced look at your lost loved one, right? But one of the things that was huge for me was I had been reading about forgiveness, and I'm like, well, I don't have a reason to forgive John. He died from cancer. It's not his fault. And I kept sticking with that for a while. But I was reading about how some people were like forgiving their children that died and the kind of things that they were forgiving them for. And I thought that, well, that's really interesting. I don't really understand how this would work. But one day in my meditation, I knelt down and I decided, why not? Let's give it a try. And I started out with, I forgive you for dying, John. Simple, right? First level. And then I forgive you for not being there when our granddaughter was born. I forgive you for this. I forgive you for that. I forgive you for not being at our daughter's wedding. I forgive you. And all of these things. Then it was other things. Like, I forgive you for not being here when the sprinklers went out. I forgive you for not being here to take care of your chickens. I literally found every possible reason to forgive him for things that I personally actually didn't think I needed to forgive him for. But after an hour, I found myself in a grief, complete sobbing. And I know that you know what I'm talking about. Sobbing, snot running out of your nose, the ugliest of visceral grief sobs. And I didn't realize how healing it would be at the end of this journey of forgiveness. It can be such a powerful tool in learning how to heal your grief. And I would say that was probably a turning point in my grief journey.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, amen to that, because forgiveness, it goes back to me. Even in my book, I talk about, the Savior, he died for us, and we can forgive. And so, and I went through, why shouldn't I have to forgive this? And then I went through a time when I started healing relationships, even people on earth. I did that, and I go, wait a minute, I still need to heal a relationship with Cheryl and Robin and Daniel. So it was the humility, becoming humble enough to get out of my head and into my heart, and let my spirit be my guide and say, okay, and pray that forgiveness is a wonderful blessing we've been given, and it frees the heart. When you forgive someone, you forgive yourself. It frees your heart, because guilt, I harbored guilt when Cheryl died and when Daniel and Robin, and that was just holding me down. And so finding forgiveness to myself and my loved ones and was such a freeing experience for me. Letting Heavenly Father do his work on my heart. Let Heavenly Father heal my heart and mend it. And forgiveness was center in that, and my faith. Because forgiveness is healing. It's beautiful, and it's enlightening. Wow, I mean, when I finally forgave myself for not being there for Cheryl, how I thought I should have been. Wow, that gave me a whole new level of being able to have my relationship with Cheryl, even though she'd passed away. It gave me a whole new understanding of what love is. Because forgiveness is love.
Yeah, it is. We just have a couple minutes, and really just a couple minutes. I want to just give you the opportunity to share, what do you feel that resilience means to you?
Well, resilience to me means experiencing something traumatic and tragic in your life. And instead of remaining still and let it overwhelm you, and it can overwhelm you, you decide to move forward, keep moving, move forward, go on with life, raise your children, do your job, work, whatever. But just keep moving and not let it get you beaten down. Being resilient means to just, okay, fine, this happened in my life. I'll learn from this, but I need to just keep moving forward and keep loving those who have passed away, keep relationship with them, and just keep moving forward and not letting it beat you down, because that is when the adversary gets into your life. I decided through my faith and through my help, my sister, my family, and my help my family and my deceased loved ones, I just kept moving forward. Would not stop, would not let it, I would not use it as an excuse for inactivity, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep move forward and keep loving yourself and forgiving, and don't give up. Never give up.
I love that. Well, thank you. Tell us again the name of your book.
Okay, it's called Heartache to Healing, Navigating Grief and Finding Peace by Lloyd C. Davis.
And you can get that on
Amazon, and just you can look up Heartache to Healing, or my name, Lloyd C. Davis is the author's name, and it's available in ebook, paperback, and hardcover.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for being on our show. It was great to reacquaint with you and sit down with you and share this hour with you, and thank you for sharing the story not only with me but with our listeners as well.
Thank you, Michelle. I sure appreciate that.
Yeah. If you enjoyed what you heard today, remember to subscribe to our podcast so you will be notified of the new episodes. And we would be so grateful if you would give us a rating and review. It helps others to find our show. Please share it with your friends. Let them know. We all need to hear lessons and remember that we're not in this life alone, and that other people are doing hard things as well. If you know of someone who has a story about real life that they're willing to share, or maybe it's you, send us an email at rrpodcast@ksl.com. You can find us on Facebook at Relentlessly Resilient, or on Instagram, Relentlessly Resilient Podcast. Both platforms have a Calendly link set up to a time to pitch your story for our show. Reach out. We would love to have you on our show. Remember, whatever you do today, remember to be kind. You have no idea the struggles others are dealing with in their lives. Have a great day.